Thank you, Jade. We make a start. Welcome. Bore da, croeso. May I welcome all members and officers to the hybrid meeting of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the press and public today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching remotely. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's webcasting and YouTube channels after the meeting is concluded, should anyone else wish to view it. To confirm, as a Council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notification or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when they wish to speak. Please, could you also keep your microphones muted when not talking, so there aren't any interruptions encountered. May I also remind members that as per the statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting? And we're setting a precedent where the cameras are off, that we will not call people in or ask them any questions if their camera is off. Thank you. Moving on to the agenda. Jade, our Democratic Services, can you confirm that if we've received any apologies, please?
Of course, thanks, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Colette Thomas and Councillor Simons this morning.
Thank you, Jade. Any other apologies from anyone? Could I ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interest? Councillor Best? Not available at the moment. Councillor Cowles?
Yeah, personal interest. I'm a governor at Blenhaven Heritage School and Aberystwyth School, and I've got a brother that attends Aberystwyth School as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liam. John Cunningham?
Councillor St. Albans. I've been there for 40 years. A governor for St. Albans, much more.
Victoria Haller?
Parent Governor Yscol Pantig.
Councillor Jones? Governor, at Blenhaven Heritage School, and I've got a grandson at Aberystwyth College. My declarations are: I'm on the Pro Management Committee, and I have a grandchild at YGG and great-grandchildren at Blenheim Road and Coediva Federated Schools. Councillor Simons not here. Councillor Tew, no. Councillor Thomas, no. Councillor David Thomas, no. Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, I'm a governor at Our Lady of the Angels Primary School and Cwmbran High School.
Thank you very much for that. Takes us to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of October 2024. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to the report we received on the school's capital maintenance programme. Members, can I ask you if you approve these minutes as an accurate record? Thank you. Those are approved. Action sheet, can I hand over to Gerrit for a quick update?
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind members that in terms of the second and third actions on there, we've actually received those, and I've forwarded them on to yourselves since the agenda was published. So it's just the bottom one that's outstanding now, so I'll chase that up and hopefully get that to you soon.
Thank you. Perhaps we should have dates and deadlines to expect them in. Okay, thank you for that, Geraint. Please, could I confirm that members have any questions? Are they happy to accept the action sheet? Thank you. Takes us to agenda item 5, Torfaen School Improvement Services, Provision and Impact on Learner Standards. The purpose of the report is to share a recent evaluation of the impact of teaching and leadership on pupil standards and progress, to provide an analysis of Torfaen exam outcomes based on provisional outcomes published by Welsh Government, and outline the plans to address recommendations of the Welsh Government Middle Tier Review. May I welcome Councillor Richard Clark, Executive Member for Children, Jason O'Brien, Andrew Powles, Claire Williams, and Ed Partfield, we've got Ed Price and Andy Rothwell. I didn't put your designation because it takes too much time. So, on behalf of the committee, may I thank head teachers and staff pupils of Ysgol Bryn Onyn for our very informative recent visit, which has proved very useful in preparing for today's meeting. Can I ask officers if they could provide members with a brief overview of the main points in the report, please? Thank you.
Morning, everybody. So there are 3 appendices linked to this report. So the first one is an evaluation of standards across the board for schools. So this is a new report that ES have produced for local authority this year, and it looks at literacy, numeracy and digital skills, so all aspects of, all age aspects in Torfaen schools. It's really helpful because prior to this it was very difficult to gather that overview once core data sets were removed for primary schools, and we're very focused on the quality of teaching and learning at all aspects of schools. Claire and Andy are both here because we want to really join together the inclusion and improvement aspects of working, and the next step is to devise a local teaching and learning strategy in collaboration with EAS, and to avoid having this false separation between inclusion, ALN and school improvement. It's about good quality teaching and learning for all. So the standards report, which looks at skills, is the first tool we've got of a baseline picture. As you said, we have the provisional data from the summer outcomes for GCSE exams. Just to reinforce, this is provisional data. It's still going through quality assurance with schools. This is the second form of checking that's been issued. The final data will be released before the end of term and will be available on my local school website. Throughout this term, school improvement partners and local authority officers have met with head teachers who've also carried out their own analysis, and they've used it to devise their school development plans for this year. We don't want to wait too long before starting that work. I've said this before, but this is one part of the picture. Exams are important, absolutely, but we are very interested in quality teaching and learning for all children right from the start of their school careers. EAS are here as the school improvement partner for the local authority. We really value that relationship. Estin praised the relationship that we've developed and the work that we've jointly constructed in the recent Estin report, which has now been published. As part of the session today, we take the opportunity to reflect on the middle tier review and about how we are planning to continue and strengthen the relationship with the school improvement partners, which we'll develop in line with the recommendations in the middle tier review. That's a helpful introduction, hopefully.
Thank you. Any other comments from any of the officers before we start? Okay. Can I invite members to ask the officers questions as per the order agreed during our pre-agenda meeting yesterday? And I'll just get hold of it. Question 1 is with me, and it refers to 3.5. The partner school model is managed and quality assured by a small central team within the EAS. Are there any risks regarding the capacity of this team going forward in light of the potentially reducing from 5 LAs to 4 LAs?
Thank you, Chair. The school improvement model that we currently have working in Torfaen is the core of giving you the information that you need on your schools. So regardless of how the impact of the middle tier review works its way through from September 2025, that is an element of the provision that I know that Torfaen are absolutely clear about needing to protect as part of that. That's the piece of the jigsaw, the piece of the model that helps you to know your schools well. So regardless, as I've said, of what happens post-September, that will be part of the model that remains protected, as will, to the best of our ability, the link officer role from the EAS into Torfaen. That's been one of the things that Torfaen have been very clear about.
Supplementary? Takes us to question 2, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to paragraph 3.8. Under the curriculum partner schools, how many schools in Torvine are providing support or sharing best practice, and if so, who are these schools?
I don't have the numbers with me. I can find them for you, but the numbers have increased significantly since inception of the process in 2012. So for us, it's really important that schools in Torvine act in two ways with that partner schools model. The first way is to engage with the model across the borders of the local authorities. And the second way is to make sure that schools in Torvine feel that they have something to offer. All schools in Torvine have got strengths, and all schools in Torvine have got the ability, of course within the remit of the capacity that they have in them, to be able to share their work and their practice across the region. So that will be something that we'll continue to keep high on the agenda for engagement and also sharing. But I can certainly, Councillor, get those figures to you. I didn't have them. I don't have them with me, and I wouldn't want to guess because I may get it wrong, but I will certainly pass them through.
I appreciate that.
Just in terms of about showing good practice, it's not solely reliant on that curriculum partner school. We're trying to develop cluster working, and as part of the middle tier review, they have the horizontal and vertical working, so secondary to secondary, secondary to primary, primary to primary. You'll see in the standards report there's a number of schools named as having good practice around digital literacy or numeracy. We do that in all the term thematics that we complete because we are trying to encourage schools within Torvine just to work together naturally. So we've looked at how well pupil voice is used, we've looked at differentiation within schools, we've looked at literacy outcomes recently, and as part of that we always highlight case studies. Those reports are shared with all head teachers and with governors, and the expectation is that governors and with head teachers proactively work together. In terms of cluster working, there are still clusters that need development. It's not strong across the board in Torvine. So as officers, we will attend cluster meetings at least once a term. And point of that is, again, we can see good practice within clusters and encourage people to share. Last week, we had a consultation with head teachers around our priorities for next year as part of our education improvement plan. And it was really lovely to eavesdrop on the secondary heads who were talking through the data set that's been shared with you. And they were noting where certain schools had better outcomes and proactively talking about they wanted to go and visit to see what that school had done to learn what was working well. And they also talked about challenges that they'd faced, whether it be cohort size or imbalance in males or females within the group and how they'd managed behaviour. So the curriculum aspect from ES is one aspect, but we absolutely expect schools to be proactive in seeking out good practice amongst themselves.
I don't know whether my supplementary fits into this, but I think it does in relation to best practice. You know, on the television last night, was the Secretary of Education was talking about our poor results in literacy and numeracy. And come to my attention lately, a terminology I haven't heard before is the accelerated reading programme. I really want to know, is that part of the curriculum for all schools? And is it part of their budget to provide that for the schools?
Okay, that's a specific business, that's a package that schools could choose to buy in. I'm not going to advocate a particular business in Scrutiny, but schools have delegated budgets to buy resources and create the best curriculum programmes that they feel. I think I'll leave it there.
A delegated budget for that. That's fine.
I'll just add on that. We've got some examples, and Andrew's just referred to cluster working, where clusters have taken an approach to using certain packages, and where they have, that really benefits learners because children through their primary school experiences are having something that's very common amongst the cluster of schools. That naturally then follows through into the secondary setting, where a secondary is using a similar packages. That really helps that transition process, but also helps the learners because they're getting something that's common across the cluster, so we're advocating the cluster work. Can I just also mention about the partner schools and curriculum? You've visited Bryn Onyn. So they're one of our schools who have got a partner school working with them closely. Over the last 18 months, 2 years, I've been following that school's progress. That model's worked really well for that school. I'm not sure if that was brought to your attention as part of the visit, but it's a really strong example of where expertise from one school is being shared with another, and it's really helping the improvement journey for Bryn Onyn. So yeah, we've got a couple of examples of that across the authority, but that notably because you visited.
We've got that on our paper. That's question 3, Vicky Holder, please.
Morning. So my question relates to 4.1, and you state that most pupils speak and respond to spoken Welsh well in around half of the English medium schools. Is there an issue regarding Welsh language resources and support for the other half in Welsh medium schools? And what is the strategy at a leadership level for improving Welsh language performance in your English medium schools? So there's 2 parts. So is there an issue regarding Welsh language resources and support for the other half of the pupils that you refer to in the English medium schools? And then secondary is, what is, at a leadership level, what is the strategy for improving access to those resources and education for our English medium schools?
Thanks. Just to say that the report, the actual standards report that you have is based on sort of the broad evidence base across all your schools. At a moment in time, and I think what's important is where we're making, I don't want to use the word judgments, but they are judgments, where we're making those quantifiable judgments about schools, we're saying that there's still room for improvement in the progress learners make in Welsh second language, for example, linked to your question. So that's what we're saying. We're not saying that the other half of schools in Torfaen are not focusing on it and not doing the right things. We're saying at this point, those children, young people are not making the progress that they could, just to frame that for you. So from a support perspective, there's a robust programme of professional learning that English medium schools can access to develop their Welsh medium provision. I've got to make sure I get those words in the right order. So in the actual report that you were given as the appendices, it talks about 13 of your primary schools are currently accessing that support to improve the professional learning, the skills of teachers and support staff to then in turn, over time, improve the progress learners make. So the other half of your schools are doing the right things. They are recognising that they need to improve that area. That's the first thing, isn't it? Recognising that there's room for improvement. And they are accessing the right types of support to enable them to do that. The link then from accessing that support right through to seeing that impact on learner progress is not going to be immediate. So that's something that conversation with their school improvement partner will continue to develop. I know you're picking that up through the professional discussions as well with schools. So it's just keeping that on the radar, making sure that the support is right. Also, schools have got access to opportunities to send staff members on sabbaticals. So whether that be for a term or longer, I think it's 1 or 2 terms, where they come completely out of the school setting and immerse themselves in the learning of Welsh. So that offer has been there across Wales for about 3 years. A few of your schools have taken up on that. So there are a number of different routes schools can take, and I'm quite confident that there is the right type of support to enable schools to improve that provision. It's challenging, but your schools are certainly not addressing it, if that helps to explain that. that point.
And sabbatical's really interesting. So there was one of our head teachers wanted to take part in a sabbatical, but it was going to be too expensive for him to go in terms of the national funding available for him. So it was a real challenge. We've got the leader of a large school wanting to become more proficient in Welsh, but just the financial limitations of it. It's also the challenge of taking a leader out of school for a significant amount of time. So, as Debbie says, there's a range of forum and support. We also have the Welsh Education Forum, the Welsh Strategic Plan, we've discussed here before, because it's not just about within schools, it's about how we promote in Welsh in the community. As a local authority, how do we promote it so it becomes part of the mainstream, and that there's opportunities to practice it at all times, not just within schools. During the pandemic, we did see a drop in learners within our Welsh medium schools where families were unable to support them at home. So that's again something we're trying to address. In terms of resources around Welsh medium provision and ALN learners, there is a challenge there. And that's been acknowledged by Welsh Government. There's been national work streams about having better resources for those learners, specific phonics programmes, specific maths programmes. We discussed here about research and work we've done with various universities before to develop local resources for maths. But it is undeveloped, and that's a national challenge.
Thank you both. Thank you. Any further supplementary? No. If you've answered some of our questions, we'll still ask them, but just say they've been previously answered. Question 4. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. My next question relates to paragraph 4.1. Regarding the last bullet point, are there many schools who haven't identified areas for development and access professional learning regarding numeracy and digital skills? If so, why haven't they done it?
So you'll know, I think I probably partially answered it, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. You'll know that schools have cycles where they self-evaluate. They look at aspects of their delivery around areas that they know that need to improve. So there will be schools over each academic year that will focus on possibly either literacy and or numeracy, or their own self-evaluation will be saying that they've got to access numeracy for certain groups of learners. It might be boys, it might be free school meal learners. So I don't think it's as simple as saying some schools who have not accessed it. I think what we'd be more interested in is whether they've identified the right priorities to then be able to access the right type of support. So I think you can see from the main report, we've talked about in detail the number of schools over the past few years that have accessed literacy, numeracy, digital, for example, support. So if they'd accessed it in a previous year, you would expect them then to be embedding that practice over time. So I think much of the work is about have they identified the correct priority, and then how can we continue to help and support schools to make sure that that actually makes a difference to children and young people on the ground and the progress that they make. And just to say, I don't want to touch on some of your questions that may be coming up, but everything we do with schools is completely grounded in good quality teaching and learning. So you'd be touching kind of the digital space if you were talking about literacy and so on. So hopefully that's kind of unpick that a little bit further.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew.
And Andy and Claire might want to come in a second. In terms about prioritising literacy, numeracy, digital skills. So, for example, in one of our schools, they took a decision to prioritise literacy because reading of their learners wasn't where it needed to be. And without those reading skills, learners would then be unable to address numeracy and digital. So we had a lengthy conversation about whether they should all have the same balance, or what's your initial priority. So it's based on that cohort and the need they've got at the same time. Anything you want to add?
So Through the mechanisms processes, we've got team around the school meetings where we'll go and talk to our secondary schools once a term, and our professional development meetings where we're meeting with all schools, primary schools predominantly, on a yearly basis. As Deb and Andrew have alluded to, we'll talk about what are their priorities. The list often is long, so they can't do everything in one go. I think the key thing for us is that they've addressed and they know the issues, and then the order in which they're going to tackle them based around what is most important. So, reading as an example in one particular school might be a focus. What we're then looking for is the progress then over the course of the year that school makes, and that's where the school improvement partner really comes into their own, because they're supporting the school, brokering additional support if required, or looking towards a partner school, and then supporting the school in monitoring the progress against that. That information then comes back to us, so we get a feel for how schools are progressing there as well. So over the course of last summer term, as part of our LA business plan with Annex plan with EAS, we asked, and it features as part of the evidence base here, we asked school improvement partners to look at the progress of all pupils' literacy from primary and secondary schools. That was really, really helpful, informative to see where we've got some really strong practice, and then to look at some of the areas that need further development. So you see elements of that within the report. That's actually been shared with TASC as well. So at the request of TASC, that report was circulated so governors could get a feel for where literacy was. This summer coming, we're going to be having a focus around looking at progress of pupils' numeracy skills. And then in the third year, we're going to have a focus then in the summer term looking at people's digital skills and how they're progressing. So that will also tie in with the wider Torbine digital strategy to see how impactful that's been. So keeping a broad overview of everything. That work, as I said, with school improvement partners, plus the meetings that we conduct with schools, really helps us to gain that intricate knowledge of where schools are and understanding their priorities.
Thank you. Can I ask John Cunningham to ask question 5 in absence of Councillor Colette Thomas?
Sorry, I forgot about that. When in the paragraph concerns are raised regarding both Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 performance at some schools, what plans are in place to improve both, and how does Key Stage 5 performance compare to that at the Torbine Learning Zone?
Okay, yeah, I'll start with the Key Stage 5 element, if that's okay. So I haven't got the comparison between Torbine Learning Zone and Wintu. We can say that it's their data. We don't have that comparison yet. We will get that when it washes through in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be happy to share and present that. But in terms of Wintu's performance this year, we met with the school in October, and that was a key topic of discussion to talk about that. What's interesting is that cohort of learners was really small for Gwynfleet this year, which meant that the percentages were jumping quite quickly, each child representing 3%, and there were quite significant spikes and falls accordingly. When we then drill down into each individual pupil, which is where it gets quite interesting, thinking about their destinations, all of those pupils had a destination, mostly university, but there were some apprenticeships and some went on to other qualifications. Which was really pleasing because obviously we want to make sure that every pupil's got a sound and solid destination. But what also came through that conversation was universities, where pupils have been offered a university place. Quite often they were being granted unconditionally. And that was resulting in certain learners who might have been on a pathway to, say, a B or an A or whatever, disengaging somewhat with their learning because their next stage of learning, going on to university, irrelevant of how they performed in their A-levels, they were guaranteed a place. So sort of the follow-on from that then is early conversations again with Winter about how things are looking for next year seem really, really positive. The much larger cohort and again destinations that were really solid and sound. Anything around Key Stage 4?
So similar to what we've said before, that we meet with every secondary in the autumn to go through their provisional data, and that will inform the support plan that each of them gets. So numeracy is something that we want to develop across the board. Maths results is not where we want them to be. So it's partly about the secondaries working together to look where the good practice is. In some schools, there are particular subjects that were identified as underperforming, and so there's a discussion whether a head of department needs bespoke support. What is the particular issue? Is it a line management issue? So then precise support is put in place dependent on what the need is for that school. So that happens on the summer outcomes, but what we're really key about is it's about quality teaching and learning right from the start. So it's about, do schools know where their good teachers are? Are they drawing on that good practice to share it with other staff within the school? So again, that's another part of the conversations we have each year. And if they don't have good practice, where can we broker it from another school so someone else can go in? And that's that curriculum partner work.
Apologies. Question 6, which relates to page 32. We're now going on to the Appendix 1 Evaluative Impact Report. Thanks. Liam.
Thank you, Chair. Of the 14 schools inspected since March 2022, 8 schools have recommendations that focus on improving pupil standards, 6 on improving writing, 4 on improving numeracy, 3 on improving Welsh, and 1 to improve digital skills. Is 8 out of 14 high or fairly consistent with national inspections? Thank you, Chair.
We've got that data, but not with us. We had a meeting with the ES actually who compared the regional recommendations. I can't remember. Okay, but it's something we can share with you afterwards. That's it.
The outcomes are broadly in line, generally, with national data from Estin, and the areas that have been picked up as recommendations are pretty similar to what we would be seeing. But I don't want, it doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, and it doesn't mean it couldn't be better, but they are broadly in line with where things are nationally. Yeah.
That's the interesting problem to this one. Okay, so we've used that overview that EAS have of the recommendations across the board to inform the thematic reviews that take place each term. So differentiation, self-evaluation is one that came up quite regularly across Wales. So where we're looking at differentiation or professional learning within schools, we're doing it through the frame of self-evaluation. So are schools correctly identifying what they're doing well, or do they need help to identify their strengths and areas of development? So it's used as a tool to inform our next phase of evaluation.
8, which is on page 32, and I'll ask this in place of Councillor Collett-Thomas. The LA is implementing the TAS approach in all secondary schools, the PRU and 1 primary school, team around the school, that is, these acronyms. Are you confident only 1 primary school requires the team around the school approach, and how is this monitored?
So in terms of, are we confident that that only 1 school requires it at the moment? Yes, right now, in terms of primary. It's a process that we can effectively turn on or turn off as the need arises. So it's not really an issue in terms of sort of starting that process or ceasing that process. But in the here and now, for our primary schools, yes, that is accurate and supported in the way that we'd want it to be. In terms of how it's monitored, so we'll monitor it through the actual team around the school process, and we'll come to a point where we might say, well, look, we're satisfied now that your school's getting the support it needs. It's self-sustaining. We can have that conversation with the school, step it back. What I would say, though, on top of that, and Andrew and I have discussed this with schools actually at length, we find the process really, really helpful. not because we're trying to hold the school to account, but just to understand how a school is getting on, what their issues might be. So even with some of our secretaries who are performing really well, just having that regular conversation with them is really helpful. We were in 2 schools recently where we actually said to the head, how would you feel about, how do you feel about the process yourself? And they were really keen to continue it. It just keeps that relationship, and that's so important in the world in which we work. It keeps that relationship bubbling along. We can share issues as they arise, share good practice, put support in, and it just makes sure that we've got a really tight understanding of where our schools are. Yeah, so that part, sorry, Andrew's just mentioned that part of one of our processes we've got, which looks at our internal self-evaluation of how well do we know our schools. We'll discuss the support that we're putting into schools with schools and just make sure of a cross-reference. Well, this is how we perceive the entire picture to be in terms of support that's coming into your school, be that HR support, support around finance, support from EAS, whatever that might be. Just make sure then that the school are on the same page as us, or we'll talk about, well, this is our picture, does that align to your thinking? And again, that's just been part of that, bringing everybody together with that common understanding of how schools are performing.
You'll recall in our off-camera sessions in the past, I've referred to my tours of the schools, etc. Where I can, I pop along to these meetings. It allows me to triangulate everything that's being said and for me to get a feel of the school and speak to the head and senior members of staff. So I think it's an invaluable tool for not only the department but for myself in my role.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to check, you were talking at the end about the way you look at what support the schools had and then have that conversation with the school. And are you finding that your conversations align? So what you feel that they've needed support in, they've recognised that and agree with you?
So far, yes. It's been quite tight in terms of where we might have a school that's getting some support around finance and conversations there. It's aligned exactly with the experience that the schools had and what they've fed back to us. But I think that's the whole point. We want to make it part of a conversation so that we are on the same page. So if the school says, no, you've got that wrong, we're happy to change that, but it might be we go in the other direction as saying to the school, well, no, we think you are. So it's common ground, common understanding, and just forging that relationship and understanding.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of best practice is clearly being captured throughout Appendix 1 of the report. How confident are you that this is being widely shared and taken on board across all Torline schools, not just within specific clusters or via partner schools, for example?
This report, I think Andrew's already mentioned, this report has been shared with all schools. The summer term thematic review, which is part of this report, which looked at the progress of all pupils with illiteracy, that's been shared with all schools, and it's also been shared with all governors as part of a request from Torvine Association of School Governors. The sharing mechanisms are there. I think where it's really effective is where you've got clusters that work really well, and they're able to share that good practice. Heads are increasingly talking about and sharing within their own meetings now effective and good practice. So we attended a heads meeting yesterday. One of the heads spoke about experience of Eston inspection, but really that was about progress of literacy and how he's developing literacy in the school. He was sharing that with heads. That aligned with some of the information from within this report. So they're there. I think Andrew's already said, and rightly so, it could be strengthened. In some areas, it could be strengthened quite significantly, and we're actively trying to promote that with schools.
So one of the things we're encouraging now is cluster governor training. So a few of our clusters have done it. I know St Albans, Crossy, I think Abersock, and Westmont and Cumbrian High are really keen to do it in the spring. I think that's booked in, isn't it? I know from conversations with those two heads, they want to talk about literacy because they feel that that's something that could be strengthened across the cluster. There is variation in the quality of cluster working, and it's something we certainly want to advocate, and we want to get governors on board with that. Andy talked earlier about having like the same literacy package within a cluster because it helps the progression of learners. That's not in all places at the moment, as one example. So this is a starting point. We're certainly not there, I think, and yeah.
I think the teaching and learning strategy is relevant as well, so that's something that we are starting to develop with the support of the EAS, because there is already a teaching and learning framework in place that schools can access, which signposts, effective pedagogy, areas of research and professional learning opportunities that schools can tap into. But we're trying to work with the EAS to sort of take that to another level where we can provide some bespoke examples of exactly that best practice that exists in Torfaen, for the context that our schools are working in, and working with schools to sort of populate that and add another layer to it. So I think that's a next step that will support with that.
Thank you. I wonder if Councillor Watkins, you take question 10 for us, please.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, so we've moved on to Appendix 2. It says, in 2024, national outcomes are lower than in 2023, 22, 21 and 20, but broadly similar to 2019. Is that because we've returned to the pre-COVID ways of working and marking? And do you anticipate that direct comparisons will be able to be made next year?
Yeah, the system at Key Stage 4 has undergone a period of significant change. You'll recall that consistently from about 2010 we had all Wales score data sets. They ceased in 2020. There were 4 years where basically exams were marked in different ways, but also adjustments were made because of the challenges that learners had faced during COVID. It was always the intention from Qualifications Wales, working with the WJC, to return broadly this year to 2019 outcomes, and that's happened nationally. It has resulted in an anticipated slight decline from 2023 to 24. It will now be for Quals Wales to determine for next year the boundaries that are in place, comparing with the standards that they see across a broad range of evidence that they see in exams and marking, to determine that. So we can't fully predict that.
And from this year's results, we'll be able to compare rather than previous 4 years, yeah?
Yes, so the charts you see in this chart do have 2 years of data in them as line charts. Obviously, they do come with the caveat that cohorts vary in individual schools, and there will naturally be fluctuations, and it's not necessarily 1 year patterns that you are looking at, but you are looking at patterns over a longer period of time in terms of trajectories.
I think it's also to be mindful, and probably will dominate some further conversations that we have with you around some of the new quals as well that secondary schools are going to be challenged with. First teaching coming in for some of those in September. So I think some of those are going to be, as I've said, first teaching. So the comparable nature of those is going to be it's going to take some time to embed as well. So just something for the future, but I think it's worth mentioning, Chair, at this point.
Just taking us back to the Welsh Government's school improvement and accountability guidance, and how Welsh Government are encouraging us, and we're definitely seeing this with Estyn, around the sort of using comparative data. They've heavily pushed us away from trying to do that. Rather being data-driven, be far more data-informed, and the expectation of us, and this is why we do the team around the school meetings, the expectation of us and schools is to be using that information to plan for improvement as part of a wider suite of information that we've got around booklets, lesson observations, etc., all of those other policy assurance activities. So I think we said right from the start, it's part of the jigsaw, but it's not the single most important thing in the way that it was previously.
Councillor David Thomas isn't here. Victoria, do you want to take that question? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So this is Appendix 2, 1.7. With regards to the Welsh Government identified error for the pass grade for the Skills Challenge certificate, once rectified, how do you expect it to affect Torfaen performance? And will there be a knock-on effect in terms of wider performance information within the pack?
There are only two measures it affects. That's the Welsh Baccalaureate Skills Challenge measure itself, and a much, much smaller impact on the CAP 9, because it's one component part of the 9. We will know from mid-January when the final packs are published, and that is rectified, but we would imagine minimal change to the CAP 9. Torfaen schools are strong, at the Welsh Baccalaureate in particular, which is very, very positive. We'll compare when we get that final data out.
Thanks for that. Ask question 12 at 2.5. Councillor Watkins, can you ask this question, please?
Thank you. Yeah. So all 6 schools in Torfaen are above the Welsh Government modelled outcome line for CAP 9, despite 3 schools being below family averages. How much importance is placed on the Welsh Government modelled outcome performance compared to the family averages, national averages, etc.?
Okay, how are we going to phrase this? It's going back to what Andy's saying about being data-informed. So these are prompts for conversations. I'm really pleased all Torfaen scores are above the modelled expectations, but objectively, some of those results aren't great. There are a number of learners who didn't get strong qualifications in maths and English. So whilst compared to schools across Wales, we're doing okay, I would still want our children to do better because it improves their life chances, their employment chances. So, interesting, the conversation we talked about in post-16 is similarly, the results may not have looked so good, but actually all those children got their first destination for university and they've done well. So it's about using these tools to prompt a conversation rather than just taking them on face value. The families data is interesting if we want to pair schools up and say, go and look at that practice elsewhere, because there's a similar school that's done really well compared to you, but they may have had a whole cohort of exceptionally bright, very wealthy children who did really well that year. And so again, it's trying to understand the context of those results. So they're a prompt for a conversation rather than a conclusion in themselves.
I think just building on Andrew's point, I think it's really important that the report that you're referring to now is a jigsaw, piece of the jigsaw, but that first report that we talked about, where we're looking at the performance of all learners in every year group, still picks up the same themes that are coming through in this. So it goes to show actually that you pick up the progress in numeracy as slightly less well developed across every year group, and actually the data at the end of Key Stage 4 is signalling that for a number of schools. So Andrew is more eloquently saying that actually you start to work with schools far earlier on, and that progress shifts right across, doesn't it? So I think it's a real example of how that standards report now can be the baseline for members to be able to hold the system to account, as opposed to just the measures at the end of Key Stage 4. I think it's a really good join-up about how those pieces fit together.
All I can say is at last. Any other comments? Okay, we'll take you to question 13, which is mine, and it's referring to 2.7 and 2.20 and 2.22. As suggested by the performance in families and nationally, there appears to be an issue regarding more able and talented pupils. Are schools focusing enough on this group of learners, and is best practice being shared where appropriate? Another question is, are we challenging these pupils enough, and is it having an effect on their behaviour?
Okay, so this was interesting. This is something the secondary heads was discussing at length last week. It's an issue across all of our schools, is are we extending our teaching and learning for the most able? So based on those results, no. Okay, so it's a priority for us going forward. But how we improve the quality of teaching and learning for all, but with a particular focus on more able and talented And that was something, it was really great to hear the secondaries talking about actually how are they going to work together, how will they prioritise that. And in particular areas where certain schools have done well, they were talking about going to visit those schools to see what good practice was there. But it is an issue for us across the board.
And just building on that, one of the other challenges that secondary schools in Torfaen have identified is the new expectations around learners in that bracket of 14 to 16. So that kind of key stage 3, old, you know, but we know what we mean. Don't think I meant to use those terms, but the 14 to 16 group. And that's very much around, as Claire was saying, getting the teaching and learning right, and the curriculum offer right for those learners. And again, bringing you back to the standards report, that first report, that indicates exactly what the Key Stage 4 data is telling us. Not all learners are making the strongest amount of progress that they could. So again, there's some robustness, isn't there, in that kind of picture across Torfaen. And Torfaen secondary schools particularly are really well engaged in that 14 to 16 discussion. And as Andrew said, sharing that learning, sharing that practice to be able to make sure that the teaching and learning approaches in each of those schools is addressing the needs, particularly, not solely, but particularly for those more able learners, but also other learners. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't focus on both ends of the spectrum as well.
Claire might want to come in a moment. We had our post-16 partnership meeting the other week with schools, with the adult learning and staff, and with Torfaen Learning Zone. And we were talking about curriculum pathways for all learners, and particularly those looking at alternative education and those perhaps a vocational pathway is most appropriate for them. And our ALM learners, I was saying that we need to, as a whole group, have that map of the correct provision within Torfaen. Is there anything you want to add?
The other thing that we discussed was looking at pathways into workplace learning then post-16, because, you know, we have identified that there probably are some gaps there. So the conversation was around communities team working with schools to identify career opportunities, aspirations and so on. But the discussion went on to those opportunities need to be there for the pupils to engage in, because you can raise awareness, but there's nothing for them to go into. You know, that's a bit fruitless. So that is part of the ALM team's plan to work with schools, but I think it's bigger than just the ALM team. The other thing I wanted to mention was in terms of, you mentioned, does it have an impact on behaviour? And I think, again, part of the teaching and learning strategy is not just about subject knowledge, it's about attitudes to learning and developing resilience in pupils. We know that the pandemic had a detrimental impact for many pupils on their resilience and their ability to stay focused and engaged and have that resilience to keep on trying. We've talked about the impact of the unconditional offers sometimes on that, just that intrinsic motivation to want to do the best, whether you need it or not. So that is also part of the teaching and learning strategy. How do we develop those learning behaviours in pupils?
Look, you mentioned obviously post-16 and the college and pathways to work. Do we look regionally or even outside of the region, like Oxford University or even, you know, quite a few of the universities?
Okay, well, Claire's our Oxford graduate, so I'll look for advice from Claire in a minute. Yeah, so there's the SEREN project that operates, isn't it? And some of our most able. I know historically Oxford has come to do workshops with learners within the region, often looking at those that probably wouldn't have considered Oxford or Cambridge as an option before. Torfaen Learning Zone does work regionally, so one of the things we've talked about is accessibility of courses for Torfaen learners. It could be a challenge for them to go to campuses that are not in Torfaen. So that's another piece of work. We're talking about what are the curriculum pathways. Anything on Claire as a brainy person?
I think it's working with schools as well too. You know, how do they engage with further education? because it doesn't need to just be at secondary level. You know, primary schools can be taking children on visits. Primary schools could take children on visits to universities to raise their aspiration that it is an option available to them. In my previous local authority, I took a group of children to Oxford University for the day for year 5 and 6 children from Glen, just to open their eyes to the fact that that was an option available to them. Why shouldn't it be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big concern. It's been a concern for years in our local authorities, the aspiration of parents and the aspirations of students as well. And, you know, we've tried to work on it over the years, but this is still lacking, I think, in lots of areas. Thank you for that. Question 14, John Cunningham, please.
All schools have a higher contribution made by literature rather than language, apart from Westmont School, with equal performance in both. Is there any reason why? It stands out quite a bit as the difference between language and literature is very consistent for the other 5 schools.
Obviously, the literacy measure has 2 subjects that can contribute to it. We only put this table in because we try to see if schools are focusing perhaps one more than on at the other, and you would want a balanced approach from schools. It partly reflects the variances are not that great. They are all slightly more contribution made by literature, but there's not anything in those differences that concern us. There would be deep conversations with the SIP, with the head teacher about those small variances to see whether there's a balanced approach to literacy as a whole within the school. But that table's included just as a check, really, to check that there are no radical differences, and there aren't.
Question 15 relates to 2.13. And the question is there a specific reason why only one Torvine school is below the family average for numeracy? And is best practice being shared by the other 5 schools?
Just briefly building on the previous answers, it is a very positive picture in the majority of schools. The difference below is what's worth looking at as well, and it is by a very small margin. It is approximately the equivalent of 1/3 of a GCSE below. That is not to say there isn't further work and support to do with that school.
Councillor Janet Jones, would you mind asking question 16, please?
Yes, Chair. The question relates to paragraphs Appendix 2, 2.19. Only 2 out of the 6 Torvine schools have ensured that all learners achieve a qualification. What are we doing to address this, and what support do these schools need?
So, in terms of the support for those schools, there are a range of programmes and activities that all of those children can access. So, the Inspire project and NEET's team will work with those schools. Sometimes it might be that there's some support from a youth service as well. But probably one of our key areas there is, in terms of those children, it's likely to be linked to children who are attending the PIU. Now, those children who are attending the PIU, you'll be aware, there's a criteria and a reason why we have a PIU and how children access it. For those children, it's about the progress they make within year. So they'll come in, there's a baseline assessment for them, depending on what point in year that they join. And then they're given an appropriate curriculum to meet their needs. Now, on occasions, that does mean that they will conclude their time in the PIU without a recognised qualification, perhaps that would feature here, but that doesn't mean that they don't then have a further destination. So we had a couple of children last year, in particular, who ended up having a destination in TLZ or up in Crosskeys College. We had a couple of children who moved into apprenticeships. So I think that's one of the key bits for us, is making sure that those, where there isn't a recognised qualification necessarily gained, but that doesn't mean that that's the end for that child. Every child then is then supported onto their next phase of either education or employment.
So, as part of that, we met with the head of the PIU, so it's a new head that started this year. and she is revising the curriculum offer. And so it's about perhaps having more self-contained qualifications, a suite of qualifications is one of them, so that children do gain something. And it's about trying to bank qualifications early in case a child disengages at a later point. So that's an active piece of work that's taking part within the PRU. With the secondaries, we've had conversations with all of them about the CAPT 9 score and the qualifications that contribute to them. And firstly, no Torvine schools are doing this, but there is the option for gaming with qualifications, where you could put children in for lower level qualifications just to bank and up your score. And one of the secondaries, we had a conversation, and she was saying, the CAPT 9 score isn't where I want it to be, but I'm determined that children leave with qualifications that will genuinely help them into employment, and therefore she wants to stick with that, and I think that's a really justifiable approach. So we're also careful on what qualifications factor into the CAPT 9. Are they meaningful? And we're not just playing a game around numbers here.
We had the Jubilee Traveller children in the council, and they related to the banking of the qualifications. So, yeah. Any supplementary on that? Okay. Question 17, Vicky. Thank you.
Okay, so this is in reference to 2.21. Is there any reason why Torvine schools are well above the Wales average for Skills Challenge Certificate each year? Is there a strategy that is being used that could be applied to other subjects?
I don't know how to answer that. I'll just say we'll have to go away and look at that. Yeah, unless there's anything on that. No.
Okay, question 18 is Councillor Jones. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Most of the indicators show that expectations are not being met regarding free school meals pupils in Torvine. Can you explain why, and what support again is being put in place to address this issue?
Okay, so free school meal learners are unfortunately not attaining at the same level of those who are not eligible. So there is funding, specific funding that goes into school, the Pupil Development Grant. So that's a Welsh Government grant that goes to all schools, and it's about trying to narrow that attainment gap. So we want to improve outcomes for all learners, but also reduce the attainment gap. So schools put together their grant plans, and they get assessed with the school improvement partner to make sure that it's relevant use of the funding. It's really challenging. This is a national issue. We're trying to address the impact of poverty. This is going to be a priority for our education improvement plan next year. And it's looking at all aspects, whether it's about entering education employment training, it's about your qualifications. Attendance of those eligible for free school meal learners is lower than those not. So it's about what community and social support is also in place for those learners. At the same time, I'm not going to tar all free school meal learners the same brush. There are those children who do really well, but as a trend, that group generally does underperform. Within the ES, Adelaide, I'm thinking her team around working around deprivation. That's this specific work scheme. Team.
Just to say that the support, professional support is there, but again, I bring you back to the standards report. So yes, this is an indicator at the end of Key Stage 4. When you go back to the standard report, you'll see that this refers to all learners, including those vulnerable learners. So as a council, you know exactly which schools are not performing well enough for all groups of learners. They're already identified. There's a few of those schools. And actually, the inspections to date of your schools, so if you look at external validation of that, it talks about the progress of all learners, and the provision actually has been strong over time in those schools for those learners, but it doesn't mean that that is the case everywhere, in every classroom, for every one of those free school meal learners. So I think there's a handle on it, but there's a lot of work to do. And as Andrew says, this isn't just a schools issue, it's challenging. And there's much further work, isn't there, to do around that broader community piece and attendance and exclusions, and mapping across some of those more complex reasons as to why as well.
Just add on to that. Children entering education, generally from an EFSM background, will have a lower starting point, so right at the age of 4 or 5 coming into school. They're having to work much harder compared generally to their non-free school meal, sort of the comparison there between the two. They've got more distance to travel. But that's why the early years element and involvement, getting families and children involved in early years activities, preschool, Flying Start, that's absolutely essential because that's the point at which we can interact and work with families at the earliest possible stage. And I think if we're talking about breaking the cycle, it starts there and then we support all the way through the system, but it's getting that early intervention in.
Thank you, Andy. Claire, can I just ask a question beforehand? Is obviously we've measured the deprivation index in the past over time. I just wondered if that had increased in, when was the last time we measured the deprivation index of our wards within Torvine? Well, there we go. We have to read your mind, Seeker.
Well, I hope you're not going to ask me too many tricky questions about WIMS data, but yeah, sorry. So
lift it up a little.
There, is that better? We've just reviewed the mainstream ALN funding formula. So one of the elements, there are 3 elements, one based on pupil numbers, one based on ALN, the numbers of IDPs in a school, and the third is on deprivation. And the school budget forum agreed to split those elements equally in recognition of the fact that deprivation does impact greatly on pupils' chances. But free school meal is not the measure for that element. The WIM data will be the measure for that element, so it captures that wider. It's more broad in terms of capturing how deprived the learner, the community of school in the school might be. And the reason for the equal weighting is based on the research, really, that children are more likely to have an ALN, if they live in deprivation. So that's part of that bigger picture.
Jason, sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. Did you want to comment about WIMS?
Thank you, Chair. I should have put my hand up there. I was just going to add that the last National Deprivation Index was done in 2019. So I'm anticipating that every 5 years, aren't they? So I'm anticipating that we'd be working on the basis of the 2019 one at the moment.
So that was, I think we had 2 wards under the limit at that time. I don't know whether there's been an increase. That'd be interesting to see that new data. So thank you for that. Councillor Watkins, is it question 19? Yeah.
Yes, it is. Thank you. For 2023 and 2024, female performance in Torvine has dropped considerably. Considerably more than female performance across Wales, whereas male performance has dropped more consistently. Is there any particular reason for this other than the cohort?
Acknowledge that there is a drop between different cohorts of different learners. When we use the word considerably, I think it's approximately 10 points, which is equivalent of a 1/6 of a GCSE grade per learner. So it's a relative, we're acknowledging that there's a drop there, but it is cohort dependent, which would need to be explored further at individual school level, which will have been done by school improvement partners.
Appendix 3, the National Coherence Submission. Councillor Cold, question 20.
Thank you, Chair. On page 51 of the report, it states we are committed to maintain high delegation rates so that funding reaches schools and that grant funding is transparent. What impact have recent changes to the distribution of funding to LAs instead of regional consortia had on school budgets, and have you received any feedback from schools on this? Thank you.
I'll start, and Debbie may want to come in. So we maintained the status quo this year. The grants came to the LA, but we passed them over to EAS that then distributed them to schools in exactly the same way that it has always been done. That's a part of our ongoing conversations, is about protecting funding in schools, particularly things like the school improvement partners, having those locally, because that's again a source of income for schools. I think one of the strengths of the model that EAS operates is about drawing from expertise in schools rather than having a large number of centrally employed staff. It means good practice is from current practitioners, and it allows school-to-school working. We're unclear at how grants will work next year from Welsh Government. So there is potentially an impact, but until we have clarification from Welsh Government, I can't give you an answer. Is there anything you want?
I can. Staying on page 51, with regards to support from partner schools, members understand that some work really well where the support is tailored to need. However, there are occasions where schools provide what they are able to rather than what the other school necessarily needs. As per section 1 on page 51 of the agenda, how does Torfaen propose to ensure that all schools are participating in purposeful collaborative approaches and structures focused on improving learning by April 2026?
If a school is not satisfied with the support they're getting, or if they've got concerns it's not meeting their need, they just need to tell us and we will amend it. That has happened. And sometimes it's not necessarily the school that makes that decision, sometimes it's us. We have had schools where they're very content with the level of support and the type going in, but we think it's not impactful, so we've changed it. And that's the point of the SDP professional discussions, the team around the schools, the multi-agency meetings. So that for many schools, there's a half-termly check-in about is it having the right impact. In terms of developing it further, through the head teacher strategy group, we've started to talk about the recommendations from the middle tier review. So the head teacher strategy group consists of every secondary head teacher and a primary head teacher in each cluster. And it's about how do they start to share practice within, or how do they develop sharing practice within their cluster and between clusters. So going back to, I talked about governor training, cluster training. It's looking at extending those models. I think the cross-cluster working is quite underdeveloped, and that's something is definitely a priority for us next year. So that's secondary heads working together, it's primaries working together across clusters. Again, so I call on governors for support for this, in that heads are doing it, heads are starting to develop it, we're developing forums. As an example, the ALNCO forum, Claire is keen that cluster ALNCOs work better together to look at the pathways and systems that are in place. The cluster training you've taken place, Andy, is focused on literacy and other aspects. So we can put the forums together, but we all need to be driving it as governors, as officers.
It's just to say that the professional standards for teaching and leadership have, 5 elements, and one of those is collaboration. So there is, an onus and a responsibility on schools to be collaborating as well. So part of our challenge to schools is also how are they doing that and how are they seeking those opportunities.
You mentioned governors, so my question, Jane, sorry, you had a supplement.
Yes, thank you. As a hypothetical then, if a school did speak to you, and just say, for instance, they were getting digital skills from another school, and if they did speak to you and say it wasn't quite what we wanted or it wasn't the standard we wanted, obviously you would help them, but would you go back and speak to the school that was supposed to be providing that expertise?
So it's brokered through the school improvement partner. So it depends why it's not meeting the need. Is it that it's felt to be a poor quality, or is it just not quite specifically what they want? It's difficult to talk about hypothetical. So as a hypothetical, if it was just a poor standard of support, then through general quality assurance mechanisms, they would either be given an opportunity to develop it, or they would be removed as a partner school. Or if it's just about the focus isn't right, then the conversation takes place to amend it. It's difficult as a hypothetical. I think of some examples. We had a school where the partner school wasn't quite working for them. So the school improvement partner wasn't working for them because of a relationship issue. So the head teacher made a request for a change of school improvement partner, and the principal school improvement partner facilitated that. Similarly, where
another example, this more linked to digital actually. The school is receiving some digital support, but actually through the school's own self-evaluation processes, recognised that whilst the support was good, it actually wasn't meeting the needs that they wanted. So that in that instance, they just spoke to the person who was delivering and said, can we just shift the focus for the next 4 or 5 sessions? Because actually we need this, I think it was a push around data as opposed to looking at word processing. And that you know, the quality of the support was excellent. It was just in the wrong area for the school. So we just shifted it very quickly. Again, that's Andrew's alluded to. That's the relationship that we really want to foster with schools. That openness.
And it's knowing your schools as well.
Yeah. Just another example, and so where we've spoken quite a lot in many different situations about attendance in Torvine and the progress we've made, and we've had some really nice feedback from Eston, which has been very positive. But we still know that we're not where we want to be. We're getting ever so close to it, but we're still not there. One of the big areas that did a piece of work with a couple of secondaries last year, and we were picking up a pattern that authorised absence of EFSM learners was significantly higher than non-EFSM learners. So we're in the process now of working with 4 or 5 schools, some secondaries, some primaries, about how can we tackle that. Sitting here right now, I don't actually know what the answer is. That's why we've got the working party to come together, share expertise and ideas, and put in place some ideas then that can be taken back to school for them to talk to schools to use to try and bring that down. We do know, looking at data, that illness quite often accounts for a lot of authorised EFSM absence. We're about to launch, it's coming through central comms, but it's also going to go into schools, a piece of work that we've done with Public Health Wales, which is saying to parents, it's okay if your child's got a cough or a cold, it's okay to bring them to schools, and the school can then make a decision. If they're not well enough, they can return home. But we want to try and encourage as many people back in school as possible. So that's one part of the sort of EFSM authorised absence challenge that we face, and how we're going about tackling it.
Consistency across schools as well. It's based on the head teacher's authority or not, and it's about being consistent and all looking to the same guidelines and policy, I suppose. Thank you for that. Question 22, you mentioned some of this, but I'm still going to ask. Have you identified any barriers to cluster working, particularly around understanding progression? And are all Torvine schools working to the cluster model?
Okay, I'll start. So they are working to a cluster model, but various degrees of success and depth. I think one of the challenges everyone's faced is assessment structures were opened up by the current policy of Welsh Government. And it's taken a while for head teachers to get their heads around how they're going to assess and what progression looks like. That's still an area of work, and that's been quite challenging in that heads are in charge, and they may have different views on how to approach a problem. So, choose my words carefully here. So in some clusters where perhaps you've got some very strong-minded head teachers, they may not want to align with what others want to do, and that's often a challenge. So part of this is it's about having a shared vision and a shared agreement that they can all sign up to, plus some degrees of compromise that may go against what they want to do professionally, but actually the majority in the cluster may want to do. Claire, do you want to speak about this?
Yeah, well, coming into this role as a former head teacher, I really understand the challenges around cluster working. But I think if people can see the why behind what you're asking them to do, if they can see the rationale and they can see the reason and the positive impact, that often helps. So if you're talking to head teachers and saying everybody needs to use the same reading programme, that's different to if you're saying these are all of our children and we want them all to make really good progress. So how can we look at common approaches to reading so that children can make the best progress? So sometimes it's about how you sell the message as well. Because all head teachers want the best for their pupils, but they don't necessarily want to be clones of each other, and I completely understand that. So it's looking at what are we trying to do with cluster working when we're talking about assessment of progression. So coming back to the ALNCO cluster working, I think some of the barriers to that, because it's important to understand why people are not engaged, and it's not the will isn't there. Sometimes it's around not being able to be released. It could be because of capacity at a school level. Sometimes it could be down to funding. So it's trying to unpick the reasons why people maybe haven't engaged and trying to remove those barriers. So with cluster ALNCOs, we've got some clusters that are working really well together as ALNCOs and some that are not because they don't want to. There are varying reasons. So in the ALNCO forum, we're going to create a space where we will always do some sort of joint activity in cluster. And then we can build on that as people can see the value in doing that. And I think with the teaching and learning strategy, you know, we can bring in the benefits of cluster work in that as well, where we can show some examples of where clusters perhaps have got a common approach to the teaching of mathematics and how that's impacting positively on standards, for an example.
Just building on both bits from Andrew and Claire, we've got some examples of where clusters are working really well in Torvine, and they get the common purpose. But another benefit, and I think this needs to be shared as one of the levers as to why we should be pushing more cluster working, is actually the heavy lift of undertaking the development of literacy in a school. In fact, shared across 4 or 5 schools as a cluster, you're sharing the workload. And that's really helpful for schools, you know, sharing that workload element, really, really important. We've got one cluster, I won't mention their name, but they've developed a digital digital pathway for pupils from 3 all the way through to 16. They've developed an attendance pathway for pupils from 3 to 16. So as parents are transitioning as well from primary into secondary, they're getting a common message and a common expectation, I suppose, from both the primary and secondary. So I think pushing those messages out and saying, look, these are the benefits, as well as having the common purpose, there are actual material benefits for parents and for you as staff as well around workload. That's helpful.
Quite a few years ago, we did some work with actually seconding a member of staff from a primary school into a secondary school. That worked really well. With Green Meadow and Coidiva, with Cumberland High just across the road, and while I was at secondment was the deputy head from Green Meadow, and that worked really well. I just wondered whether or not we also did a governor cluster training at work. You know, we held a governor's meeting, a joint governor's meeting with a suitable agenda, including other governing bodies, and that linking the governing bodies, linking the staff, it also helps to, you know, do that work of cluster work. And I wondered whether or not we could improve on the governor cluster work as well as the school cluster work.
I think we can. Yeah, we've got some good foundations there, but there's always room for development. Just to pick up on the point about seconding primaries and secondaries, I'm really keen that we're quite open that secondary heads could apply for jobs in primary schools and primary school heads could apply to be a head teacher of a secondary school. It's a transferable set of skills. There is specific knowledge, but everyone can pick that up. I've seen it work really well, and I just want to get that message out that you're not stuck in the one sector that perhaps you previously worked in. So.
The message about they're all our children, which, you know, is the right one. Andy.
I think you're right, that common understanding of they are of the wraparound child through 16. Just on the cluster government training, we've got Ed here who's led and helped develop those sessions with clusters. We've completed now 3. There's 2 to be done in January and February, and then 1 more to come then in the summer term. That's just us managing our workload and spreading things out. The really powerful bit about those meetings, probably 2 really powerful bits. One is getting governors together from different schools, just so they can talk and network and get to know each other's challenges, barriers, successes, etc. That's really powerful. But the other bit is the governors, with the agreement of heads, they're setting the agenda. We're not generating that agenda. Heads not generating that agenda. We will work to whatever the need of that specific cluster is. And that's been really nice. So it's been focused to the needs of governors in that cluster rather than us setting our own agenda that we think that they should listen to. That's not to say that we haven't brought useful bits of information that we've gleaned from around working in the local authority and region, but it's powerful.
Good, yeah, and we've seen the difference in the Children Association of School Governors. Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add one more point, one of the challenges we face is the attendance of governors at those events. We know you're volunteers, but we're probably getting between 50 and 60% attendance, even with 2 months' notice. So more encouragement. We know we see similar faces at all those events as well.
I'm from one of those aforementioned clusters. I'm now I don't know if I have to declare it in my role here. I'm a governor of St David's Roman Catholic School, and I attended the Roman Catholic cluster. And one of the interesting parts for me was the difference, which is VA school, and my role as a governor as VA. So in chatting to Andrew, and from some correspondence we've received from an LEA governor, we're proposing in the near future to have cluster meetings for LEA governors, just to actually go through what we expect from them, how we can support them, etc., etc. So, you know, I did actually pick something up from the government meeting and take it away. So again, useful for me to attend these things.
That was actually brought up on the table today with on in the TAS meeting as well. I think they spoke to Andrew afterwards. Yeah, good. Sorry.
I welcome that, Richard, because I've been the LEA governor for some time now, so I would welcome that sort of forum. Can I just ask on the question that we were talking about, cluster meeting? I know that the primary heads, they all have a meeting, don't they? All right, got that?
All head teachers, the primary and secondary, meet together.
They meet. How does that fit in with the clusters? You know, are they on the same agenda, or what? Do they relate to one another? I'm not too sure how that will work.
Okay. So the clusters is a more focused agenda for what they are prioritising as their cluster. Every half a term, all the head teachers get together. So our lead primary and secondary heads, they meet with me weekly, and we will always agree a joint agenda for those meetings. So LA officers attend, we're invited to the full head teacher meeting, which we really value because it's one session. So, for example, yesterday we talked about digital skills, we talked about aspects of ALM. A school showed good practice in terms of quality of teaching and learning. So there's that half-termly fuller agenda. For their cluster meetings, it could be about, for example, their literacy pathway, what package they're using and how they intend to roll that out. It could be about cluster attendance policy, but it's more focused. So we look for the holistic things in the full head teachers and more bespoke in the cluster ones.
And also on that, we as officers are all assigned to a cluster, and then once a term is the kind of minimum expectation, we'll go and join one of those cluster meetings as the sort of local authority representative, just to listen to what the local cluster needs, and just see how we can support that.
I'll take question 23, and it's on page 53. And the question, I think we've partially answered most of it, but if there's any gaps in it, please bring it up. Are you confident that there is capacity for all school leaders to have opportunities to observe first-hand evidence of leadership and learning in other schools as part of their active professional learning? And if not, what support will be put in place to assist this?
So that's currently available. There is more than enough capacity within the system for current serving head teachers and senior leaders and practitioners generally to go and observe live practice in another school, whether that be within Torfaen or whether that be in one of the other local authorities. I don't envisage that changing. I would envisage that growing. However, not all practitioners take that opportunity to engage in that. And there could be various reasons why. It could be, as Claire mentioned earlier, around some of the challenges around release. It could be that it's actually not, say, a priority for a certain group within that school currently. But again, it has to be at the right time for each school. The important thing is that the option is there and the provision is there for when it's ready for them.
Just a point on school development plans. Do you actually pick up if there's a need in particular schools on, if there's a need in one school development plan or another, and match them up, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part of the conversations with school improvement partners that we have early in the autumn term, but also then just meeting with, when we meet with schools, one of the really useful things about having that information and knowledge about what's going on in each school is you can say, well, so-and-so school's got this going on, you've got it. Yeah. Really worth meeting together. But a nice example last year where one of our larger primary school heads wanted to, sorry, phrased that wrong. One of the heads of the larger primary school, they were looking, wanted to know how the secondary organisation of the school day was done, not necessarily timetabling. So we actually put them in contact with one of our smaller secondary schools. There was a really nice bit of collaboration between the primary head and the secondary head around the organisation of the school day, moving children around, timetabling, that sort of thing. It was a really useful piece of work, and again, it's just based on our knowledge of what's going on, so we can share that.
Thank you. Victoria, question 24.
Thank you, Chair. This is in reference to page 59. Members will understand that a lot of the Welsh media and school improvement support is brokered from the Caerphilly area, with the possibility that Caerphilly will withdraw from the EAS. How will this risk be managed going forward?
Okay, all plans are in development at the moment, so I can't really comment about Caerphilly. What we have talked about is actually we want to strengthen partnership working within Torfaen, and I think actually we've got quite a lot of capacity there that we can draw on. We'll continue to keep it under review. Whichever schools, whichever local authorities are in the partnership, one of the things we've talked about is making sure that that we have that quality assurance of the schools, and so we will draw from schools within the partnership because of the quality assurance aspect. But at this point, I don't know I can comment further. Yeah, yeah.
It was something that was brought up in our visit, so we need to keep our eye on that. Okay. Question 25, Victoria, could you ask that question as well?
Yeah, of course, Chair. Okay, so this is with reference to page 60. Considering the projected timeline and key milestones for a transition, how will Torfaen address significant risks, issues and challenges anticipated during the transition to the proposed new collaborative model for meeting policy objectives by March 2026? Also, is there a contingency plan for risk around Welsh Government funding needing to be maintained at its current levels?
Okay, so at the moment we've made our submission to Welsh Government. I'll get the feedback from our submission on the 18th of December. At that point, based on that feedback and any feedback from here, I'll take a paper to Cabinet. At the moment, we're looking to not radically change how we operate, because there are a number of LAs in the region that had really positive inspections, and we've recently had very positive inspection that's praised the work of the EAS and the relationship that we have with them. So I don't want to rock the boat. And I think Debbie and I are really clear there's scope for development, and that's what we will continue to do, and that's detailed in the appendix that you've got there. And we'll do that with schools. But we can only operate on what we know at a particular point until we've got clarity of funding and the feedback from Welsh Government on our proposal. I can't really comment further. But just to reinforce, the system we've got at the moment is working well, and that's being externally validated. There is always room for improvement. That's always saying in a large operation. But we understand we're not going to throw out the good just to move forward for the sake of it.
I say it was extremely difficult at this moment in time to draw up a contingency plan when you really don't know what the settlement is going to be. Now, when the settlement comes into the council, then the council then will decide how much they're going to give to you. And so it's a difficult thing to say, isn't it, at this moment in time, if not impossible.
Councillor Watkins, question 26, please.
Moving on to page 62. Why is Torfaen the only local authority contributing £100,000 to the PDG advisors, excuse me, within the LAEG equity section?
It's quite a simple answer. The Torfaen local authority are the banker local authority. So the resource comes into Torfaen and goes straight out. So Torfaen acts as the banker for the regional pot. There's nothing more to it than that. So the money comes from Welsh Government to Torfaen on behalf of the current five local authorities, and then that resource is deployed across the region.
Madam Chairman, I just do love these acronyms. Can somebody tell me what they are? What is the PDG and what is the LEAG?
LAEG.
Yeah. So PDG is Pupil Development Grant, and LAEG is the Local Authority Education Grant. You were testing me then.
I'm going to set a challenge and we'll write a story with all the acronyms in. There we go. John Cunningham, you've got the next question.
With regards to the national delivery model, have you received any assurances that we will provide the level of support that Torfaen schools and partners would expect to have and become accustomed to? That's all of a question.
I think all I can say is we've put the submission into Welsh Government and due feedback in 2 weeks' time.
Final question you'll be pleased to hear is question 28, and Vicky will ask that.
Thank you, Chair. So this question came up from our visits to schools. So members are aware that the Welsh Reading Programme, which is Welsh Government funded, is as good as the English version. However, there are spelling and language resources that have been down to individual Welsh medium schools to produce, and some books that are available through these programmes include clumsy translations compared to the English versions. Are there any plans in place to provide further support to Welsh medium schools to overcome these challenges?
Okay, and things like this have been raised at the Welsh Education Forum, and they get discussed nationally as well through the school improvement and inclusion groups. I mentioned before that ALN resources were one, and there have been examples of phonics packs that there's just been a direct translation from English, which just doesn't work for Welsh medium. So it's been acknowledged by Welsh Government. WLGA also pushes this on behalf of all local authorities, but I accept there's more work to do.
Specifically brought up because students lose interest if there's no...
Just to say, just building on that, so the development of ADNOV, which is the national organisation for the development of Welsh language resources specifically, is now in operation, and much of that was built on the feedback from Welsh language schools around the sparsity, really, and the quality of some of those available resources. So that now will come into being as well. So just another layer really to what Andrew has said.
Do we know when the work will be rolled out into education?
So it started. They started very much at the qualifications end, so looking at qualifications resources, my understanding is, and the Chief Exec of ADNOD is actively pursuing conversations now with partners in the middle tier to see which resources would be suitable and or where there is a gap or a void for that organisation particularly to look at filling some of those gaps. But the voice of school leaders and practitioners from within that sector will be incredibly important. But it's very, very early days, so I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of ADNOD, but that certainly is one of their main priorities, is making sure that there's parity between the quality of resource for both languages in the education sector.
Just something that just came up, a light bulb moment. Is there an opportunity to link with the Welsh television programmes for children? Because there's a lot of resource there in a television programme that, you know, is the spoken language and the interest for children. I just wonder whether there was an opportunity that we could pick up on that. Okay. You'll be happy to hear that concludes our questions. Can I thank the executive member and officers for their time and contribution to the meeting, and ask if they would like to leave the meeting so members are able to formulate their recommendations.
Can I be really cheeky and just plug an event going on at 4/4 where the Inspire Cafe is. In the Coity rooms, there's a showcase and tabletop sale of local produce such as healthy coffee, sourdough bread, etc. So if people would like to go and see what our Inspire team are doing and partake in food, then they can do. Sorry for being cheeky.
That'd be lovely. It's on floor 4.
Coity rooms. Coity rooms.
Oh, we all got different names now, John. We'll have to give you a tour around the Civic Centre.
Yes.
Yeah, and a green meadow and a fair water and everything. Yeah.
They can possibly use numbers.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Richard. Absolutely. We'll have a quick comfort break. My apologies. Members, can I please remind you that the meeting is still in formal proceedings and still being webcast. May I remind members what's being asked of the Scrutiny Committee to consider when coming up with their recommendations. Members have been invited to 1. Review the impact of teaching leadership on pupil standards and progress in Torfaen schools. 2. Review the exam outcomes of Torfaen learners. 3. Review the planned activities to address the recommendations of the Welsh Government Middle Tier Review. 4. Offer recommendations to the executive member on the development of pupil standards, and final one, offer recommendations to the executive member on progressing the middle tier review recommendations. Can I ask members if they have any specific recommendations they would like to make on the report? Shall we go through it as per our question sheet? So the first question, or the first part, the Torfaen Improvement Services. Any recommendations on that one? That's 3.5 to 4.2 on our question.
Well, question 2, it's not a recommendation. I know it'll come into the stuff at the bottom, but they said that they were going to provide the numbers of schools that are providing support.
Okay.
And we did ask which schools they were, so I don't know if they're going to tell us which schools as well.
Okay. I've highlighted something on question 3, ALN and expenses. Whether there's a recommendation, the resources are limited and expenses of taking people out of school when I mentioned sabbaticals and things. So,
an observation, Chair, on question 5. They came back, there was no comparison, that it was,
You said on 5, they did say that once the Torfaen Learning Zone figures are published, that they'd share those so you could then compare them.
Yeah.
So that would just be another action to add to Councillor Watkins.
We've also got a meeting planned with the executive member as well, where we can take that forward. Okay, anything else on that page? We've got the 2 questions, question 6 and question 7. I don't think anything came out of that.
I don't know whether it may be an action of, because they didn't actually have the figures, did they, to compare with the actual inspection, so whether we can add some to...
Yeah, initially they said they didn't have the figures, but then Debbie came in, she was very confident. She was very confident it was broadly in line, so it would depend on whether you definitely want those figures or whether you're happy to basically take her word for it's broadly in line. So
I don't know what the members think on that.
I think he's still there. I'm just saying fine.
Have that as an action then, rather than a recommendation.
Got an asterisk on question 8. What have I done? Yeah, the TAS, through the TAS process. So, are you confident that only one primary school requires a team around them?
They seem very confident.
Yeah, they did, yeah. No, that's okay. The next one down. Your question, Liam. Cluster governor training. Is there something around recommendations?
Clusters kept coming up. Would it be helpful if I just sort of list some of the clusters? Because it actually came up.
Yeah.
First of all, question 2, then it came up again. It came up several times before the actual question we had on clusters. So the sort of things I've got written down is, they need to continue to strengthen cluster work because some are working well, but there's room for improvement with others. And it can include increasing cluster governor training, and there's a need for the secondary to secondary clusters and the primary to primary, and also promoting the benefits of cluster working in order to try and increase the numbers. So it's basically, do you want me to wrap all that round into one cluster related recommendation?
To ask
Yeah, can I just ask on that cluster business? Because what the officer said was that there was an officer was sent to every one officer who appointed to a cluster. Is there any way that we can get reports on what these clusters, what the business of these clusters? We don't know what's going on there, do we? Be interested to know what their agenda is.
I believe the cluster work is set out by the head teachers and what they feel their needs are within the cluster. That's my understanding. Yeah, that's set by the head teachers.
Yeah, I think that the officer wasn't convinced that the clusters were working as they should work. Yeah. What assurance can the officer give us that he's going to address that problem?
I don't know whether you can include it in there as well, but with the governor clusters, I think governors need to push them more, but I think they need to be advertised more. Because my impression is that a lot of governors are not aware that they're going on at all. No, exactly. No.
That's news to me. I mean, we do have the task meetings, don't we, which is a...
Yeah, but I don't feel they're advertised enough either. I think, because I run 2 governing parties, and I know the one governing party doesn't tell the governors that very much information about them, and I've not heard the other governing party mention it at all. So I think more advertising.
I beg your pardon, sorry about that. Concerns about the question you asked about the school learners being assurance that all learners receive a qualification, and they came on to the learning zone. I don't know if there's a gap in what we're doing there, because we don't seem to have had input from the learning zone. you know, how many people take apprenticeships. There's other things between academics, isn't there? Is there a gap that we're missing on something on now?
I think that can link to question 13 with the more able and talented, and my point about visiting universities and priority for more able and talented and key stage 4 learners, and a bit on aspiration to sort of give them access to other opportunities to raise their aspiration.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and I think it was a very good question, and I think they sort of acknowledged it and then spoke about the general learning, and I'm not disagreeing with them at all. And yes, ALN, yes, teaching and learning across all, but nowhere was it mentioned the most able and talented, and they are a specific core. So I didn't feel we got a strong enough answer specifically on that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Well, the answer, they weren't challenging them enough. So that recommendation is that, you know, they need to have a policy on more able and talented, along with our ALN able and talented, because an autistic child can be really talented and, you know, and have ALN needs as well. So,
on 17, we did ask the question, is it a strategy being used to apply to all other subjects for this skills challenge? We didn't really have an answer to that. At least I didn't think we did. So is it something we need to push forward?
Yeah, that was the one, no comment question, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put that one down to explore. No, it's a recommendation. Yeah, to explore. You know, basically, you know, what went well, and see if it can be applied where appropriate to other subjects.
I just wondered whether there was a recommendation to have on the question 16 with the PRU and having further destination highlighted to them, you know, because it's actually apprenticeships as well as work experience as well as university or so something around that question. Okay. Yeah.
Can I just say on one question that they didn't answer really? It's got to be rated to something in here. About the literacy and numeracy that the whole of Wales is extremely poor, including Torfaen. And I see the Education Secretary on television saying she's losing sleep over it. But what support are we getting from the Assembly to help us to address the issues that we've got? Now, that might come out in the budget. We don't know yet, do we, until the 18th of this month, whether they're going to give us any extra money. But we'd like to know, I think, when is the next meeting? Of the scrutiny. January. But by that time, then, we would have had the settlement from the Welsh Assembly, and I suppose the council would have done a draft budget by then, so we may know, officers may know, where we are going with the budget. So it'd be interesting to know that, I think, at the next meeting.
Yeah, and we'll have a meeting with the exec member off camera as well, so you can ask pertinent questions.
That would probably be the best forum to have that conversation. So obviously at the moment we're putting the recommendations in, so we can't ask any further questions.
No.
To ask, basically we just need to focus on recommendations rather than questions for this.
Yeah. So did you?
Sorry, going back to what you were saying, Rose, about the crew. That was the question.
Yeah.
Did they not say that all the pupils that were at the crew, although they may do specific timetables for each pupil, that they were all coming out with some kind of qualification and were all going on to apprenticeship?
A further destination, yeah.
So I'm not sure what your recommendation was.
Well, we look at that's just the PRU. Is that replicated across all schools? You know, because what it is 2 out of 6 schools have ensured that all learners achieve a qualification. What's the other 4 doing?
And I think, Councillor Watkins, I think the point they made was that the 4 schools that aren't, is their pupils who are going to the crew that are mainly the ones who aren't getting the qualifications at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan, could you just explain that again?
Right, so I think the point they made was where we're saying only 2 of the 6 Torfaen schools have ensured that learners achieve a qualification. Yeah. In terms of the other 4, I think the point they made was in most cases regarding those other 4 schools, it's the pupils that they send into the PRU that are the ones not getting the qualifications.
Yeah, so they did answer the question.
Yeah, and there is alternative.
exams early and they bank them in case they cannot.
No, that was a separate question.
But
I don't, that was the bank.
destination.
No, the banking GCSEs was a totally separate.
Yeah,
point.
I think the point they made that they'd started the work around improving the number of sort of destinations and qualifications on offer.
Yeah.
I don't think it was like work that had been
No,
completed.
they started it with Inspiring Meets and the Pro, and the Pro actually do.
I understand what you're saying. What is the recommendation here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they are meeting all
Yeah.
these needs.
And they've said they're revising the PRU curriculum off, so it's work that's already being
Yeah.
processed. So you either endorse that or there's no recommendation, I suppose. So it's.
Last recommendation I think Vicky and I picked up on was the general question 28. We need more assurance that there are proper translations of the books into Welsh that our Welsh medium schools are using. Because although they said they did, we knew from conversations last week that it's not happening.
I think that's probably a legacy thing, though, isn't it? Where they've got books there from previous, so it's obviously going to take time for this new system to embed.
Well, can we have a recommendation that all new things meet the specific needs of our Welsh-speaking children? The translation is accurate.
The challenge we have is that the new organisation is still in its infancy, so this will take years to get into our schools. So what are we going to do in the meantime? We can't leave our Welsh language pupils without literature or resources that...
Can I go back to question 18? Sorry, I'm sure. Sorry. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They did say that was a priority.
Yeah, this was deprivation, wasn't it?
There's a big gap without preschool meals.
Yeah.
Qualified pupils due to poverty.
But they're going to, aren't they going to?
They've got a plan.
Aren't they doing a piece of work on that? So.
Yeah, my recommendation is we
continue.
As a priority. They said it was a priority.
Yeah.
But, they actually keep that in their focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose there's a couple of examples where you've brought a few things up where we could put them into one recommendation. That you're pleased to hear the different sort of strands of work that's started, and as a committee you'd like to endorse, and then I can bullet point the two or three together.
Endorse the priorities placed on preschool meals and
Yeah, and to develop cluster words in.
yeah, there we go. So we put that.
Back to quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, we'll include the underdeveloped cluster work and the governor support. Right, okay, that'll be in that one. I don't think there's anything else on that page.
I think there was one, Chair, in terms of question 24.
Yeah.
I've got, obviously, that was the question about, the possibility of Caerphilly, pulling out of the EAS. And there was the comment about that there's plenty of capacity in Torfaen regarding Welsh medium support. So I didn't know if you wanted to make a recommendation, encouraging that that support's explored more and, increased locally, in order to have a robust and sustainable system in place, to sort of like safeguard against any other future changes. So I just want a recommendation of that.
Yeah. Are we also putting a recommendation about looking to other sources for Welsh language supplies and resources? Like
mentioned, like
television and
S4Cs and stuff like that. They must do projection books which could
and
be
videos
useful.
and
videos,
DVD,
yeah.
I mean the DVDs and things. There's resources there, but it's down to the teacher to pick their own resource up. Or we as a local authority should be
And then as again,
highlighting what resources.
then again is how they're going to spend their budget. And if they have a cut in budget, what services they're going to have to cut within the schools.
It should have equality. If it's available in English schools, it should be available in Welsh.
I think as well that everything that we've said about Welsh, we've referred to Welsh medium schools, but actually the English medium schools teach Welsh, and I know that their Welsh provisions are poor as well.
It works across the board.
So it's across the board.
Yeah, it goes to one of our initial questions, but only half of spoken and written Welsh in English schools.
Yeah.
And so what's happening with the other half of our pupils? Yeah.
That was the question I wanted to ask on the question 28. I didn't quite understand whether it was members aware that the Welsh reading programme. Now, is that the Welsh language reading programme or the Welsh reading programme? The Welsh as a nation, or is it Welsh national, Welsh language?
Language.
Welsh language.
It was something that came up from the visit.
Welsh language.
Ah, right, so it's the Welsh language reading programme.
Yeah.
Ah.
Sorry, jumping back to 23, are we confident there's capacity for all school leaders to observe first-hand leadership and learning at the schools? And they said, yes, the capacity is there, but they don't all take it up. We wondered if there was a recommendation that they should, I don't know, advertise it more, encourage it more, prioritise it more.
Prioritise it.
Yeah, because personally I think it would be a good thing for staff to do.
Members have any other specific recommendations? Right. That takes us to agenda item 6 then, the item for the next meeting. Geraint, can you please take members through this item?
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Could that be a feedback on the budget?
No, we're already set. Our meetings are already set.
Right, Geraint, can you take us through, please?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so the next item, it usually is just one, but just let you know what's going on, because you actually, if you remember envisioning, you agreed to have two meetings in, one week after the other. So on the 29th of January, you're going to be having a joint meeting with the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and that's around early years. So Councillor Janet Jones chairs that meeting, and I know a few members, I think it's yourself and Councillor Watkins on it there. So yeah. Yeah, I think Jade sent an invitation out for that recently. So yes, that's gone out. So yeah, so that's a joint meeting on the 29th, and then the following week, which is just specifically back to this education committee, we've got ALN transformation. So what I'll do is need to get the pro forma out quickly. So I'm going to finalise that this afternoon or tomorrow morning, get that sent out, and perhaps ask you to have a look at it over the weekend, and then I can send it to the education officers on Monday then. So yeah, as long as just basically confirm that you're happy to progress with those meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Chair.
I think perhaps an email to all members to remind members there's a joint on, there's another one. I know you've sent the information out, but so that we'll have Christmas in between and people will forget. So the date of the next meeting, which is what Geraint has just said, is the 29th of January 2025. Happy New Year, everybody. Have a lovely Christmas, because this is our last meeting before Christmas. Have a lovely Christmas and a Happy New Year to everybody, and thank you for your attendance. I now close the meeting. Thank you.